Hi everyone, my name is Kyle Oppenhuizen and I'm a reporter here at the Des Moines Business Record. I'd like to welcome you to the next installment of our Power Roundtable series. Today's topic is the millennial mind, and just to give you a little bit of idea of why we chose this topic, in a lot of conversations I've had with business leaders and literature I've read, this seems to be a hot topic of conversation right now, as in how do the baby boomer generation and other traditional business leaders talk with, communicate with, and manage the millennial generation. And we just wanted to get everybody in a room here and sit down and discuss that amongst a group of millennials to kind of let you into our conversation. Just to give you an idea of what we're doing with this, we're going to have a conversation amongst ourselves and throw some topics out. We're not going to come to a conclusion today, but we're just going to get the conversation going in hopes that you can get the conversation going in your business. So with that, I will turn to our panel and let our panelists introduce themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. I'm Jonathan Brindamule. I am the Corporate Communications Manager at Bankers Trust.
And I'm Christine Reeves, Marketing Specialist at the Greater Des Moines Convention and Visitors Bureau.
And I'm Deb Rinder-Godwin. I'm Vice President of Tarot International, and I'm an interculturalist.
My name is Tyler DeHaan, and I'm internal wholesaler at the Principal Financial Group.
I'm Emily Richardson. I am the Marketing Communications Manager for the Science Center of Iowa and the 2014 President of the Young Professionals Connection.
Great. So to start off here, I just wanted to get the conversation going with a simple question, and we'll start with Jonathan on this one and have everybody go around the room. What's one thing that you want traditional business leaders to know about your generation?
I would like business leaders, especially in Des Moines, to understand that our generation is grateful. I think we realize, and I hope we continue to realize and appreciate how much access we've been given by those that have come before us and how much that has helped all of us in our success, and that we understand that we are lucky and that we're willing to pay it forward for the next group.
And I would say to add to that, our generation is really open for challenges and has a lot of ambition, so I would welcome business leaders to use that to their advantage. We're always up for any task and are ready and raring to go to help complete those tasks.
Really two things I would say. Number one, our generation is pretty educated for the most part. And then on top of that, with the whole 2008-2009 financial crisis, I believe that this generation is a little bit more financially cautious than maybe previous generations. Well, I should say maybe not as financially cautious as maybe the greatest generation, but very much more financially cautious than maybe the baby boomers or the Generation X.
I agree with everyone and just would add that even though we are millennials and we have certain tendencies, that there are a lot of other factors that go into it, and each person is different and has different personality and working styles, so you can't really pigeonhole all millennials one way or another.
Let's actually take that topic, and I just want to kind of open up this to everyone. What's something that you guys hear thrown around about what a millennial is? What's kind of a stereotype that you commonly hear about either yourselves or just our generation in general?
Say short attention span.
Yeah. What are some others?
Another thing I would say is overconfidence sometimes. I would say optimistic be another thing. Entitled.
Yeah, I hear that entitled one a lot, that we think we maybe deserve to succeed.
And I think going off of the short attention span, over-connected, I don't know if I've ever gone to a dinner in the last, I can't think of the last time I went out to eat that everybody I was eating with didn't have their cell phone on their table right next to them. And it's hard for us not to have our devices as an extension of ourselves.
I think our communication style gets a lot of flack as well because we are very quick and concise and give me what I need to know right now so I can move on to the next thing. It can definitely be a positive or a negative in certain situations.
One thing I think millennials, and everybody right now, is kind of, there's this war against the word busy. And that's something that I think a lot of young professionals and millennials deal with, is you just feel constantly busy. And maybe it's by our own doing, and maybe it's something we really enjoy, but now I've heard a lot of people saying, like, don't tell me that you're busy anymore. Everyone's busy. So it's just
I think there's just this constant barrage of information that we get, and because of that, it's a good thing and a bad thing. Number one, it's a good thing because we have access to more information than any other generation has ever had access to, whether it's through social media, Twitter, Facebook, the internet in general. But the downside of that is that we're almost desensitized to anything that is thrown our way. So being a wholesaler, constantly one of the toughest things for me to do, not only to market to advisors in general, but specifically the millennial generation, the newer, the younger advisors, is how do you catch their attention when everybody's been almost desensitized by headlines and stuff on the internet. So it's kind of a catch 22 a little bit.
In preparation for coming here, I read a piece from, I believe it was called the Boston Group, and they were talking about how it's a reciprocal communication process for millennials, that we not only want to get things constantly, but we want to be engaged. And I think that's really true. A lot of us came of age at a time where we had Facebook, or we had some sort of MySpace, whatever, what have you, where you could share your opinion, and your opinion was as valid as the next person. So there was kind of it was an equalizing force while all at once becoming a consuming force for us.
I think it's kind of interesting how you said everybody can have their opinion. I think, at least in my, what I've seen is that with the coming of age of Facebook and Twitter and message boards, blogs, is that the millennial generation tends to be a little bit more opinionated. And I think that has to do with the access to be able to communicate. You're not actually in front of somebody communicating, which can be sometimes intimidating, where it's a lot easier to say something through a message board. And so I think opinionated is something that our generation is definitely they definitely have a lot of that. So,
Deborah, as you listen to some of these descriptions thrown out, I'm just curious on what some of the research that you've read and some of the things that you've seen, and kind of if you can speak to what some of these stereotypes are and if they're true, false, based on your experiences.
Thank you. You brought up everything that is really out there in terms of research, but with generational research, we have to consider, is the data valid? Because are we making generalizations that we have been able to watch over time? Your comments are valid because you're living that experience, and so that's why I thought this is such a great forum, because you're sharing what your experience is through the times that you've lived. If we take a look at traditionalists or boomers, we've had several decades to watch and to see if the trends really are accurate. With the millennials, you haven't had as long a time to really take a look at that data to see if it really plays out over time. And so I think we have to do this kind of discussion, and in the workplace do these kinds of discussions, because it is how things affect you and what you're experiencing that I think is the most anecdotal research and is the most valid. Because there are a lot of descriptors about your generation, but the stereotypes can be good. We categorize. So if I know a descriptor, then when I meet you, if I'm flexible with that descriptor and I base how I know you on the experience I have with you, not on something that I'm holding because people said you're a certain way, then that stereotype works for me. If it's inflexible, if you're judged by a descriptor and people just assume because you're in that generation that you actually will behave in a certain way, that's unfair. And so we have to be so careful with what we document and consider research. At Terra, we do a lot of research, and so the generational research, I'm always a little leery of tagging any particular generation that we haven't had enough decades to really look at with an attribute or a descriptor. It's so much more refreshing to hear from you how you experience what your experience is. You mimic what's out there, but we'll have to see over time really how that plays out. Much easier to take a look at the traditionalists and the boomers and even in the article, though, that we read, I felt even the boomers were a little bit misrepresented. We have to look, did we get every socioeconomic group in this research? Did we get every demographic, or is this just mainstream culture that we're really weighing in on? All those things play into whether or not the research is valid.
I think an interesting point too is that because we're still young, it's evolving.
Yes.
And because all of our environments are changing so fast, our behaviors are also adapting as we go. So to be able to say that millennials behave one way right now might be valid, but add another 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years and those behaviors are going to be different.
And I think looking at the context of other generations for how we're perceived, Tyler listed off confident or overconfident as one of the traits that is attributed to millennials. And confidence can be a good thing, can also be dangerous, but I think almost every preceding generation sees its successors as overconfident or cocky or that a little bit. I would actually look to you and see if that's true. That's just my perception of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we really have values in terms of culture, and generations are cultures, subcultures. And so we have values that we hold that are based on what it takes to survive in whatever time period we're born into. And so the values, you actually might share some values from other generations, you just demonstrate them differently based on what's going on in the world as you're growing up. And they say traditionalists are the closest to the millennials. You actually share quite a few values. Now how you act those out or demonstrate those values could be a little bit different, but I think you're exactly right.
So you, Deb, had alluded to the article that I sent out, and just kind of explain that. So there's an article in the Huffington Post that everybody around the table here read, and the article was about, well, it's just titled Why Generation Y Yuppies Are Unhappy. And one of the passages that I highlighted in that was, it's pretty straightforward. When the reality of someone's life is better than they had expected, they're happy. When reality turns out to be worse than the expectations, they're unhappy. And kind of the point of the article was a lot of millennials expect their life to be really good and expect to be successful right away, and kind of see the success that people are having around them, either real or perceived success, and feel like they're behind. I'm just curious, what did you guys take from that kind of thought in the article? Don't all speak up at once.
I think our generation is incredibly results driven. Christine said it earlier, we want things now, we want things pretty immediately, and we've been conditioned to think that way. That serves to our advantage sometimes because we're goal oriented, we get things done, but it also results in some of the discontent that article covered that millennials may feel as a whole. I felt like the piece did a good job of assessing one element of millennial culture, but only really examined kind of the pessimistic attitude of it. They ended the article with 3 pieces of advice. It was stay wildly ambitious. I didn't write down the second one because I disagreed a little bit with it, and then ignore everyone else, meaning don't measure yourself by everybody else. And I said that second piece probably should be replaced with listen. I think we get so caught up in doing that a lot of times we forget to listen.
One of the things about that piece, I think it was looking at more of a subsection of the millennial generation. To me, when I was reading through it, it seemed to me like they were focusing more on the suburban type millennials. Growing up in northwest Iowa, I didn't really necessarily feel like that was a good depiction of the class that I went to school with. And so I think you have to take a look at the different demographics, whether it's urban and rural, different parts of the United States. I think it was very much, to me, it felt like they were really honing in on the suburban type millennials, and I think that was a little bit unfair. That's just kind of the idea, the feeling that I got from that article.
As a fellow small towner, I can agree with you. I'm also from Northwest Iowa, so I was really fixated on the wildly ambitious and delusional portions of that. I feel as though our generation goes to college and there's this expectation after college that you're going to get a job right away, it's going to be fabulous, and you're just going to move on up in the world. And that expectation is definitely not realistic, especially in this economy, as you touched on. So I think kind of managing that expectation is important for generations coming up below us to understand. I also think, you know, speaking from my personal experience, I was really active in college and was involved in a lot of things. So I went from being a senior level in college to being entry level in the workforce. So suddenly you're the low man on the totem pole again and trying to manage that expectation. And you know, you want your opinions to be heard, but at the same time, a lot of people have more experience than you, so they're going to be the key decision makers.
I think if you look at each generation, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on this, but there's certain events that kind of reshape a generation, and I think 2008, 2009 is going to be one of those events that reshaped our generation's conscious. And I think a lot of millennials were coming out of college at that point in time. People were getting laid off. There wasn't any jobs available. They were noticing that people like myself who got hired in 2005 and 2006 noticed that our 401k values were down substantially. And so I think there's a reworking of expectations that has occurred in our generation because of that event. And I think that the Huffington Post article didn't do a very good job of taking that into account, in my opinion.
Sure. And just, Jonathan, you mentioned that second point. The second point was stop thinking that you're special. Now, when I read that, I was kind of like, whoa, you know, listen. So what, I think that kind of thought is out there sometimes is millennials think that they're special and kind of act as such and want to be treated as such. How do you guys react to that kind of sentiment?
It sort of ties into my thought about the delusional comment, is just because we have big ambitions, and there was another point in there that said like the use of the term steady job versus fulfilling job. Steady job is going down, fulfilling job is going up. Just because we want to have a fulfilling job that we feel really passionately about doesn't mean that we're delusional, I don't think. It doesn't really mean that we're entitled. It just means that we maybe have different priorities. I'm curious what other people think about it.
Well, I think going back to Tyler's point about the kind of pre-recession millennials and post-recession millennials, I graduated college in 2008. I entered the workforce in a pretty dismal state, and I watched my peers go through it too. And so I think there's at least been a retooling of that I'm special, I'm entitled mentality, because there was a real reality check for our age group when they became unemployed or underemployed, and they had to compete with people who were a decade older than themselves for the same level of job. And it was a sad point for not just our generation, but those before us, but it became our new reality, and I think that addressed a lot of the kind of negative stereotypes that were portrayed in the Huffington Post article.
Well, I was always kind of curious, what's the definition of a steady job or your ideal job? That could be something different for each and every one of us on what we would consider a steady or a fantastic job with everything that you always wanted it to be. So to me, that was kind of like, I don't really necessarily agree with that either.
I'm curious again, kind of what you've seen and what the research says.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's so much opportunity in this time period, and there have been setbacks recently that do affect probably how you look at things the rest of your life when you go through something like that. And you might have had expectations, and then there are societal factors that get in the way of you being able to do what you want to do, and that's happened in some way to every generation in some form or fashion. But when we think about how many opportunities are open to you, it does seem likely that you would strive to kind of create the life or find your niche, because there's so much more open. You have, as you said, the information age provides so much more for you. There's opportunity. I'm sure many of you traveled throughout your schooling. There's just so much more than maybe previous generations might have had in the mainstream anyway, opportunity to do. So it seems likely to me, and this is opinion, not research, but it seems likely to me that when you know of all of that, you would be actually trying to go out and find what's really true to you, because you can. When I graduated from college, women, and the gender issue there, women were teachers, or they were nurses, or they were secretaries. And you had a few women that ventured out of that, but the mainstream was you were funneled into one of those careers. That is not the way it is. There's so much out there for you, and you know about the opportunities, and you're mobile. You know, the world is something that we don't have the demographics where we have to stay in a certain geography anymore. So I think it would be just true to yourselves with all of that out there to really strive to find something that's unique to what it is you want. And I think it's possible for your generation as well.
I'm just kind of curious, did you guys do any study abroad at all? Did you?
I did not.
Yeah, I didn't either, but I know, I would say a good portion of people that I run around with did some sort of study abroad, so it's interesting that you put that, because I always think it's funny, because when I go back home, my parents are like, they always say, well, you know, we've never been overseas. You know, we've barely been outside of the Midwest, but yet you've been able to have these opportunities that we never had, so it's kind of interesting that you hit on that point.
I think another thing that's unique to our generation, or at least the more recent, probably last 15 years, and maybe you can use research to back this up, but our generation is expected to have had internship opportunities, the opportunity to try out jobs, to learn about ourselves, which is an incredible luxury. I know my parents, they were so dedicated to that idea, and rightfully so. My father returned home from college each summer to help out on the farm. My mom went back and worked in a local factory every summer on her time off. So the fact that that's pretty common experience now for young professionals that have gone out and had a couple internships before entering the workforce is a privilege in a lot of ways.
Well, it helps you make more intelligent decisions and actually gets you on that track to finding what it is that's suitable for you. It's interesting, we've done some anecdotal research. We've done work in India. So in India, you have a national cultural value that you respect hierarchy, something that almost to the point where we can't really understand that from our U.S. American framework. Well, most of the traditionalists are holding the senior positions in the Indian companies that we work with. The younger millennials are being sent outside of India to study. Many of them come to the United States to study, get their education, and then they're back in the workforce in India. And this same conversation is happening in lots of places around the world, because in India the traditionalists are trying to figure out how do we handle this, how do we manage this, because they're not going with the grain of how they would have respected those positions and that hierarchy, and they're wanting to come in and influence the workplace in a different way. And so these conversations are really happening everywhere, but I think it's because of the opportunity that we're allowed and afforded. I think your example was great in terms of the difference of how you can now look at things, try things out. You do come into the workforce a little bit differently because of that.
Well, I think, you know, the course of the last 9 years, there have been a lot of people that have gone into the workforce and then decided this wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be, and then they changed careers very, very quickly. You know, I have dozens of people in my social group that have done that, where they went to a 4-year school thinking that they were going to do this job, and they did it for about a year and realized this wasn't quite for me, and then they switched careers. So that access to information, that mobility, I think it does allow us the opportunities that maybe some of the other generations have not had. I agree with that.
And to expand on that, I wonder if it's really a generational thing or if it's an age thing, because our age is more inclined to have a few less responsibilities than generations above us. We don't necessarily, generalizing, have houses or kids to support and things like that, so we're more willing to take risks than other generations with more responsibility.
And I think about staging off that responsibility, again, I'm sorry to keep deferring to you, but for the numbers, it seems like our generation is putting off further marriage, having kids. I think part of that is the result of going through a recession and not feeling like we're financially ready to make those sort of life commitments, but it also is almost like just like adolescence and then college, and we keep developing that next step to kind of push off full adulthood. We're seeing that almost a little bit with ourselves, and especially with and again, I go back to my earlier statement about every generation before looks back at the next generation, says they have a little bit easier or a little less responsible. But as I was leaving school and entering the workforce, the notion of helicopter parents was coming into, where parents were going on interviews and college interviews and whatnot with their students, And you just see this continual progression of pushing it further and further down the road.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off that point, the helicopter parents. So in a lot of the things you read and just like in general conversations, I always hear this, well, it's our parents who made us this way kind of notion. Do you guys ever sense kind of that, I don't know if fighting's the right word, but maybe tension between generations? I mean, I've heard stories of parents coming up onto job interviews with their kids, which, you know, it seems to me that's a little a little too much helicoptering, but what do you guys make of that?
This is more of a, I've never heard anybody like just talking about parents going on. I've never heard of that. I don't know if these are like exaggerated or these are like specific, you know, demographics. These are suburban type families, but sometimes when I hear about some of the stuff that the helicopter parents are doing, I kind of think that they might be a little bit exaggerated, but that's just from my personal experience. I don't know. I've never experienced some of that stuff, so I don't know if you guys have or not, but I think they might be exaggerated a little bit.
I don't really have a lot of experience with it. I do think, though, I feel a lot of sympathy for people who are growing up now in the ages of Facebook. I mean, I got Facebook in high school as I was going into college, but to be growing up in a time where everybody has a smartphone and everybody has Facebook and all of those silly things that you do in middle school are going to end up on the internet. I don't know, maybe parents are just a little more protective now.
But it does make you think, though, that generations are the way that they are for good reason. So maybe parents are becoming more helicopter parents because they see the bullying that's happening on social media and things like that. So they feel like they need to try to step in and control as much as they can.
And I have seen it play out in industries. I mean, I think that it may be overgeneralized, but it still is there. And I think you bring up a really valid point in terms of we get shaped and we do things based on what we need in order to survive effectively, and so parents might be reaching out. I'm curious, how has social media shaped you? What is that factor for you? Because I did not grow up with that, and so it's interesting to me, how has that helped or how has that hindered your identity or forming your identity or managing both your personal identity with your work identity? What's that been like?
Great question. I think that social media has allowed me to communicate with more people quicker.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot harder to lose track of, say, your high school friends or your college friends because you're all on Facebook. So it's a lot easier to communicate with your several different groups of, several different social groups that you've had historically. I think that you have to be very conscious of what you put out there. And I think when people get out of college and they realize that a lot of employers are actually looking at Facebook and your Twitter accounts and seeing, you know, hey, what are you posting? I think that has been kind of a wake-up call, because a lot of these social media apps are very new in general. So I think we're trying to figure it out just like everybody else is. And so I think that's kind of a work in progress too.
One really interesting point from the Huffington Post article was about the idea of a crafted image, a crafted online image. And that goes along with what you're saying, is you have to be careful about what you put out there. And so you're going to make sure that what you put out there is positive, and that can make your image a little different than maybe what your actual image is or what your actual life is like. You're only going to put the good, positive promotions and great relationships and wonderful trips that you're going on. And if you're not having those great experiences, it can probably make you feel like you're not doing enough, or that you're not, you know, have the level of happiness that your peers do.
Well, I look at that as the scrapbook effect. I mean, our parents' generation kept scrapbooks, kept mementos, kept a lot of things like that. Not that we don't, but when you really look back when we look back 10 years ago, just now with Facebook, they just did that 10-year movie thing that they put all those out there for us. We saw the last 10 years of our lives. It was our equivalent of a scrapbook. Or the vacation slides that people used to sit around and make their neighbors watch. That's our equivalent of it, and to your point, you're not going to portray yourself in anything but, hopefully, anything but positive lights. I mean, we're hoping that that message is getting through to college and high school students, that you're going to be followed by it. I think this group is probably a little too close to it. You're in sales, we're all in communications in some form. If we don't get that much, then I'd be worried. But there are, unfortunately, a lot of people who don't get that or don't get it until it's too late.
And I agree with what you said earlier about being desensitized. I think our generation may fall into the category of oversharing sometimes, or posting too much too often, or checking social media too much too often. So I think there's definitely a delicate balance. And I'm sure we all know plenty of stories of people that have lost their jobs or, you know, something worse based on a social media post, which is very unfortunate.
I think we've also blurred the lines between work and personal life in a way that a lot of generations haven't. I don't think anything about answering emails 11, midnight, whatever time right before you go to sleep. I don't think anybody really does. It's almost an expectation in any workplace anymore that you're plugged in at all times. At the same token, I think that's where you see some, I hear, one of the stereotypes I hear about millennials is a need for work-life balance, or they were talking about the fulfilling job and how that's a trendy new term for us. And I think that's part of it, because we don't see a clear divide between work and home. We see them as one and the same.
I was just having a conversation too today, as in marketing you might be able to relate, is there's so much information about you out on the internet, and Google and Facebook know so much about us. And I have very different opinions on it as a consumer and as a marketer. I was just buying some Facebook ads for Science Center, and I was able to target very, very specifically to the type of people I wanted to reach. And as a marketer, I love that. But as a consumer, it's almost a little scary. And the people of the older generations, definitely, that I was talking to about it, saying, wow, look at the great results we're getting because we were able to be so narrow in our target. I said, wow, that's scary. You can be that specific.
It's interesting that you talked about sending out emails at 11 o'clock at night. I mean, I think there is now, with technology, and technology will definitely shape the way that our generation will continue to grow. But it's funny that now that our generation also demands information instantly as well. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. We can get information very, very quickly, but we also demand it. So when you're getting that email, and at least for me, if you're getting that email at 8 o'clock at night, you're probably going to have to respond by 8 o'clock next morning at a bare minimum, or else it's kind of like, where are you? What's going on? Like, what happened? You know, so it's kind of a double-edged sword, but it's going to definitely shape the way that we, number one, work, but the way that we communicate and the way we're shaped in the future.
Yeah, I think just personally, the other interesting thing about Facebook is you brought up earlier how sometimes it seems like we have more opportunities than our parents' generation to travel or do those sorts of things, and then you get on Facebook and see all your friends are doing seemingly more than you because you only see the good stuff. Has anybody felt like seeing that has kind of shaped how they feel about themselves or where they're at in their careers, or either positively or negatively kind of made you more driven, or just made you feel like sometimes you're behind where you should be? And maybe you can speak to that too, Deb, just from what you've seen.
It clicks into that expectation that, you're said to have that expectation. Well, is that fueled by the fact that you have so much information about other people in similar situations, and you get the documentation of what their lives look like? I think for anyone on Facebook, you can go through that a little bit, regardless of your age, but I wonder, in the age that you are, is that part of fueling your expectations for yourself?
I think that our generation is certainly very competitive, and I think a lot of that's been instilled in us by our parents. I think, and I haven't really thought about Facebook as a means whether I feel like I'm not achieving enough, or I'm doing, a lot better than compared to my peers. I haven't really ever thought about that, but I do think that it certainly can be used as a competitive tool to fuel that fire a little bit. I think that, I hadn't really thought about that, but I think it definitely could be used as a competitive tool for our generation.
I think there's a lot to be said for self-awareness, and as a young person of any generation, that's probably kind of hard to step outside yourself and really assess that. And so I think that's a big differentiator between any generation at any point in their lives, is how aware of where you should be versus where you personally want to be, and where did those desires come from. And I think if you can compartmentalize those well, Facebook just goes back to being that scrapbook. You're happy to see other people. I love seeing everybody else's posts, and I don't feel like I internalize them.
Yeah.
But I think we were also, a lot of us, that's been something we've been conditioned to just accept throughout having been brought up with Facebook as almost a part of us. Which I think some people who are jumping on, I honestly wonder if that's something that affects the older generations a little bit more, because they're jumping on and instantly seeing, oh, XYZ person has 3 kids and 2 grandkids, and why don't I have I honestly wonder if that's a little bit projected on millennials.
Absolutely.
It kind of reminds me of a constant 5 or 10-year high school reunion. You're constantly feeling like you have to prove yourself and show your classmates that I've really made a name for myself and things like that. Or like you said, you look at your friends that are having kids, and if you want kids, maybe that is something that hits you differently. But if you don't want kids, you're comfortable with that, and you're happy to see other people making a life for themselves as well.
Right, if you were unhappy, looking at that stream of other happy people might be a little bit different. You might not feel as great for them if you wanted some of those things.
Well, I think it's an interesting tool for benchmarking yourself too, because you can go back and look at your own posts, which I think even though your employer is likely to do, you're probably more likely to just some Saturday afternoon be flipping through and seeing some old post of yours or something and thinking either, oh, that was a really great experience, or oh, I can't believe that was how I was thinking 6 years ago. and it's a little bit of a wake-up check for yourself.
So, Christine, one thing that you said, I think way back at the first question, was something to the effect of how you like to be communicated with. Give me the information, give it to me quickly, and we've touched on that a little bit, but I want to make sure that that point's not lost. Do you, and again, maybe you can speak to, do you see that this generation likes to be communicated with differently than baby boomers or maybe another generation here?
Well, the data that's out there, and we don't know if the data is overgeneralized at this point, but the data would say you are more plugged in, so there's more modes of communication. So it becomes more of almost a buffet of how is it best for you? Do you like email? Do you like phone? Do you whatever it is that you do? But finding that out from someone, whereas before we kind of had modes of communication in the workplace, and they were just traditional modes we used for particular reasons. I think there are so many ways in which you might receive and give information that it's individual, really, what works for each person. But we ask that question more now, and I don't think we did ask that question in the past. And you try to figure it out. Do I get an email back right away? Okay, they must like to correspond on email. If I leave a phone message, do they actually call me back? Or so you kind of take that read on individuals, and I think because there's so many more modes, there are more ways in which you can find out how someone likes to be communicated with. We always suggest that at Terrell. Just try to figure it out. If it's your customer and your client, what do they like? Whatever mode they like is going to work for you, because you're going to be able to create that relationship and communication.
It's funny because I remember an exercise we did in college. I was in a sales class in college, and we did a 2-day class on not fearing the telephone. Just pick it up and make the phone call. And it's hilarious to think of it, because 20 years ago, that's the only option there was. You call people, you stop by, or you send a snail mail letter, and then that's how you get your information to them. So it is interesting how that's affecting even how we're learning in our generation as well.
I think it definitely shorter the better, and I think our generation definitely likes to do their own research. They don't want to be told, hey, this is what you need to buy, or this is what you need to think, or this is what you need to do. If there's something that catches their eye, they'll do the research. I think, a lot of, I get sick, I kind of go on WebMD, see what's going on, and then I'll go to the doctor to kind of verify whether or not I was right or I was wrong. And so I think the generation definitely wants to do a lot more of that stuff themselves, and that's why, short emails, texts, Twitter are very, very efficient forms of communication for our generation. It's funny that you mentioned the phone. I think it's like you said, kind of a chore to pick up the phone, and you only do it unless you absolutely need to, whether it's to finalize closing a sale, or you need to absolutely get a hold of them. Otherwise, it's always text or email. I just feel like our generation has moved away from the phone unless it absolutely 100% needs to use it.
Well, emails obviously has an amazing place in our work, but I feel like not just our generation, but the workplace culture has become overly reliant on email. And I'd be fascinated to see any sort of data that reflected how much, not just conflict resolution, but not starting conflict we could have in the workplace by picking up a phone first. Because I think, and I would speak a little bit to the millennial generation here, when you're lower on the totem pole, I think you're probably more likely to read tone into emails, and a lot of that can be solved just by picking up a phone. So a lot of times, I know I personally try to pick up the phone, and I appreciate it when other people will call and say, I'm about to send you this file, but here's my thoughts on it, and provide a little bit of background, because then it gives you the opportunity to know a little bit more of their perspective so that you can better execute. If it's your manager, their vision, or if it's one of your peers, you can collaborate better.
And the research would really echo that in terms of if you're trying to build a relationship or be known. And if you're newer into the workplace, getting yourself known, 87% of how you're perceived on the phone is your vocal quality. And it's actually the persuasive piece for you. It's how someone picks up whether or not they think you're enthusiastic or you're, a go-getter. It's from your voice. And not using that tool is actually then hiding that part of ourselves that would help someone know us or form perceptions about us, positive perceptions about us. Face-to-face, which I know that takes it a step further, 55% of how you're perceived is what they take in visually. So if they see you in person, they get that read that they can form those positive perceptions just on whether you're looking at them, how you look, you're smiling at them. So those things are very powerful in projecting who you are to someone, and yet our workplaces are heavily dominated by email communication, which tone is blind. And can someone get to know me? Can I really establish myself in just that way? And yet that's predominantly used.
It's really interesting that you hit on that, because I know several times where you're reading an email and you read through it and what did he mean, or what did they mean by that? Are they being sarcastic? Are they not? And you can't, because it's so blind. So I think our generation definitely doesn't like to use the phone as much as other generations, but you're right. You do have to have either that interpersonal communication or have that ability to pick up the phone, because it does allow you to project your thoughts probably a little bit more clearly, or be received a little bit more clearly.
And I think to your point, you read that moment, and we've all been there where that you focus in on one part of that, and the author meant nothing by it.
Yep. But
that fills you with angst until the next time you have a meeting with this person and you resolve that internally. And it's so often, if you had just had the conversation over the phone, and that's not realistic. I mean, it really isn't in our workplace, but I think if we can get back to, and as we become managers and as we manage individuals, encourage that, we'll see hopefully a higher productivity out of ourselves and out of those we work with.
And some of those old age managing techniques still work very, very well. I mean, I think for me, having a manager that comes in every single day, talks to you, what's going on, having that interpersonal relationship with you is much more powerful than somebody that kind of dictates from a memo, email memo, or maybe you run into once in a blue moon. But some of those traditional managerial skills are still very, very much important in the workplace today.
We're still humans. We have the technology, but we relate as humans, and so the interpersonal part is really key in developing our relationships as well as the perceptions people have of us.
Do you ever see differences in management styles between, I guess, how, say, the baby boomer generation wants to manage versus how millennials want to be managed?
That's a really good question. And I think part of it, there's so many salient factors. Generation is one of them, but personalities, industries, what's expected in a particular corporate culture, all of those things are going to play into how someone chooses to lead or to manage. And so I think, you know, I don't know if it would just be a generational difference. Well, when we were working with the people in India, they wanted to be very authoritarian. That's how the management was for so many years, but the millennials coming in didn't receive that type of management experience very positively anymore. And so they had to figure out what's the new template going to look like. I think there's so many factors besides generation that go into how someone chooses to lead or manage. And there are different variables based on what industry we're in and what context we're actually doing that in. I think the biggest risk, and I'm curious, follow-up question, I think the biggest risk is if we, because we're in our group, so to speak, whatever that group is, we don't reach out and really get to know someone in a different group. In intercultural research, they call that denial. And it means I really don't see any need to understand this person over here who's in a different generational group than me because, you know what, they don't get me, I don't get them, I don't need to do that. And that is such a risk because then we're actually discounting someone and losing the opportunity of really being able to know the other and leverage the qualities and the attributes of both. The other place people go if they don't discount is they go into what we call defense. And that is, yeah, I see it's different, but I'm right, you're wrong, or this works, this doesn't. And that's polarization, and that isn't effective either because we really do have attributes in all spectrums of generations that are so necessary in the workplace. So how do we create the dialogues like this where you have people understanding what their intentions are, what their motivations are, because once we get that, if we understand someone's motivation or intention, then we can kind of see them differently than we do if we just take a look at what we see them doing and we judge it. And that's the biggest risk with regards to generational difference in the workplace if there aren't dialogues such as this and cross-generationally. Do you have that opportunity? That's my question. Do you have that opportunity in your work experience? All of you are very committed to the community. Do you have that opportunity to form relationships cross-generationally?
I would say yes. At the CBB we talk a lot about diversity, and generational diversity is a big part of that. So one thing that we do encourage is brainstorming across the entire office with different generations. We've had people in the office that have been there for 25 years, and then people such as myself that have been there for a couple of years. So it's really interesting to get everyone's perspective, and those brainstorms usually bring out these very creative ideas where you're kind of cross-pollinating different generations, and it's very positive.
Looking at it professionally, Bankers Trust our Human Resources Division does a really great job of having committees and different groups that have primary goals, but their secondary function really is it brings together groups that maybe wouldn't interact on a daily basis throughout the bank. So if you're at a branch and someone's over in services and somebody's over in operations and you're all working in different departments, allow you to bring the perspectives together but also get to know each other really well. Personally, I think Des Moines is a great community for having the opportunity to interact with every age range. I don't want to just push up one part of the city, but I lived downtown for 5 years and I'm a huge downtown advocate, and a big part of that is you have every walk of life, every age range, all within a very tiny package down here, and it really is its own community and you get to know each other, and that's a great benefit to living in Des Moines.
Yeah, I just echo what you say. At the Science Center, we have a lot of cross-departmental teams where we work on projects together, and it's nice to get just to different perspectives from generations, from just their perspectives of different working in different areas of the organization. And then in the community too, there are a lot of opportunities to at least meet people from different generations, and then it's kind of on you, I think, to follow up and get to know them. So that piece of it is a little different. You're not automatically given the opportunity to get to know people very well, but you meet them and then have to take the initiative to get to know them ultimately.
I'd say you be in the financial industry, you have a lot of opportunities to work with people in several different generations, and it really comes down to this: is how does that person like to be communicated to? How does that person like to be worked with? There are some, I would say, generalizations that tend to happen, but it's not a 100% science either. So it really comes down to getting to know somebody and understanding how to work best with them. At the end of the day, I think that the Generation X, the Millennials, and even the Baby Boomers for certain have embraced technology, whether it's email, social media to a degree. Some of the greatest generation, I know that they tend to, and even some of the Baby Boomers tend to not like technology that much, and so there is another form of communication that you have to use, with the phone or just talking to them one-on-one. So at the end of the day, you have to know who you're talking to.
Going back to what Emily was saying though about taking it on yourself and making it your project, I hate to throw our generation in front of the train here, but I think one of the things, especially as we were thinking about this in advance coming here, our generation uses the term networking like none other, and I think we misuse it a lot of times. To our generation, all too often it's a transactional opportunity. I'm going to give you this because I want that. And probably the best piece of advice I got when I was young was, well, I am, but when I was starting my career, was don't ask somebody for a meeting or for anything, or any sort of time of theirs when you need something. Get to know them personally. Take them to lunch. If you meet somebody at a DSM unveiling, I'll give you a plug here. Take them to lunch, take them to coffee, take them to drinks, get to know them. And you may be able, they may benefit from you, you may benefit from them, but that should not be the intention. And I think that is networking, and we as a culture have just sanitized it to the point that it's, tick for tat, and I don't think that's a good outcome of what we have done as a generation.
So, one thing I wanted to just ask each of you was, what motivates you to stay in your job? And I don't know if this is a generational thing or if this is just each person individual feels a different way about this, but I think it would just be interesting to hear if you guys have similar feelings on that. What motivates you to either stay in your job or look for a new job? For all your employers, now's the time to right?
I'll start since I'm looking at my job right now. I love what I do, and I love where I work because I am learning all the time, because I'm working with really passionate people, because I'm challenged to always come up with new and creative solutions, and then ultimately just because I really believe in the mission of what we're doing. And that's short and sweet, but that's why I love the Science Center.
I think culture is very, very important. The type of culture that you have within your workplace is, I've seen it a lot where people in our generation have left because the culture wasn't what they had expected it to be. I think that by and large that's very important. Who you're working with, going to work every day, knowing that you're going to enjoy what you're doing is very, very important. And I think the other thing too for our generation is opportunities. I've seen that a lot where people have moved from one job to another because they felt like this job had a better opportunity for them and more in what they wanted to do. Again, it just depends on each person. But I think culture and opportunities from a millennial standpoint are extremely important in being able to retain those employees.
I want to kind of touch on what you said with the challenge. It's always challenging where I work, but it's also really enjoyable. So that's really what keeps me motivated every day, is knowing that I like what I'm doing and working for a place that really embraces me, going out in the community, and getting to know other young professionals as well. And it's fun. I get to sell Des Moines as being a fun place to come visit. So I get to kind of act like a visitor every day at my job and get paid for it.
Going off of what Tyler was saying about culture, I feel very fortunate in that there's a deep mutual respect that runs through my place of work. Leadership, peer-to-peer, I think everybody has a good place at the table when they come with an idea to be heard, to be expressed, and I think that's incredibly valuable each day when you wake up and you're going into the office to know that, you know, it may be a hard day, but at the end of the day, your voice is going to be heard and acknowledged today. It may not result in what you're hoping for, but you're at least going to be respected as an individual, and that's really, really important for me, and I'm lucky enough to work at a company that truly embraces that. But I think Tyler also hit on something else that's really interesting, is the idea, and I think this is something that is probably pretty real about our generation, but I'd also ask, is it a chicken or the egg? I think the thought is that our generation jumps from job to job a lot, whereas our parents and our grandparents, you know, my father's been with the same company for over 27 years, and that's a big rarity for our generation. And so is that because companies have so much opportunity ahead of them that they can cherry pick the talent, and therefore your point about opportunity and growth isn't there, or is it because we're as attention deficit, as they say, and we move on too quickly? I don't know. I don't claim to have the answer, but I think that's an interesting part of what we see amongst ourselves.
When, you know, going around the table there, two words that I don't think I heard were pay or stability, and I wonder if that's kind of indicative of our generation. A lot of things that we talked about were work environment, respect, opportunity to move up. You know, what do you see from that? Is that different than other generations, do you think?
I think, again, it goes into the times that people are growing up in and what's available to them. And so I think we had a lot of loyalty to companies even in the boomer generation. We had a lot of loyalty, and it was actually a value to be loyal and to stay, and companies did things to retain employees. And I think as you see things shifting and the societal changes that we've seen that have earmarked your generation, that ability and that mobility is just inherent in the times. And so I think that is reflected, not that your generation wouldn't be loyal, it's just that you have those internship opportunities, you have these things that you've seen and you see out there that you can do. And so I think it's ways to do that. And I'm a boomer and I have shifted careers, and I'm in my third career, but all of them kind of tie together. The third one, I love being at Tarot and doing interpersonal skills work. We say we're changing lives every day, and we feel that way because we're working with people and their self-awareness and their core and being more effective in what they do. But that's a shift through my life, and yet I'm a boomer. So again, we can't overgeneralize that everyone, there might be people in your generation that will find their home and stay there. And there'll be lots of other factors that will play into them doing that. So it's an individual thing, but I think the times you grew up in, the mobility, the information age, all of that has been able to fuel your ability to move around a little bit more than perhaps people did. And different things that happened, you know, after the war, people came home, they wanted to be home, they started in their careers, and again, we were much more close demographically and geographically. We stayed in one place much more, I think, than the generations do today. Now, most of you were all born in Iowa? Are you all Iowans? So
I was not.
You're not, okay.
But Illinois isn't that far away.
It's still the Midwest.
Yes.
Well, I think, you know, talking about the short attention span and the mobility and the information age, I mean, we have so much information that's thrown at us. I mean, if somebody wants to go out online and find a job that maybe they're interested in, it may not be in Iowa, it may be in Texas, it might be in North Carolina, it might be in New York or Los Angeles, but it's there. And if they want to go after it, they'll go after it. And I think our generation, as competitive as we are willing to pick up and move and do that if we feel like that is something that we feel will benefit us in the long run or benefit us in our career path.
So we're starting to run out of time here, but to wrap things up, I wanted to go back to one of the questions that we talked about at the beginning, which was just some of the descriptors and stereotypical types of words that people say about millennials, and some of the things that you guys listed: short attention span, optimistic, entitled, deserve to succeed, overconnected, kind of short communication style, give you just straight to the point. Do you feel like that your generation, I should say our generation, has been mischaracterized, or do you feel like that a lot of these are pretty right on? How do you react to some of those stereotypes that are out there?
I think that the story of millennials isn't done yet. I mean, it's still in its infancy. I think we're still reworking our identity. There's going to be other events that are going to come along here in the next 10 and 15 years that's going to change our generation's mindset one way or another. But I think when people try to pigeonhole the millennials into confident, optimistic, overconfident, desire to succeed quickly, I think it's an overgeneralization, because a lot of times they're looking at one segment of the millennial population and maybe not looking at the entire demographic. You're looking at suburban and urban, or you're looking at rural, because I do think that sometimes they tend to try to overgeneralize our generation, and we're 31, 32 years old. I mean, we still have 50, 60 years left to live, so I don't think the book has been written just yet.
Right, I agree, and sometimes I think those terms are maybe based on truth, but exaggerated a little bit, and extrapolated to a larger whole, that are maybe based on just a certain subset of our generation. Sometimes when I hear the words, I just, entitled or short attention span, I'm like, that's not me, like it makes me a little defensive, and just to say, like, don't try to put me in this box, because there's so much more to it.
You listed off a lot of those stereotypes, terms, whatever they are, and I think they're one side of the coin. We talked about this a little bit earlier. I think, Tyler said educated, we're productive, we're efficient, and one thing we didn't talk about, but I think is very true of our generation, we're socially aware. We buy local, there's the Eat Slow movement. There's so many interesting things that have come about in the last, I would say, 10 years that have really bubbled up through society, and a lot of those are led by our generation. And I think because of our interconnectivity and our ability to have a little bit more time, because we do have so many more tools at our disposal, we can think about things differently, and we are maybe just a touch more socially aware than the generations before us.
I kind of agree with what Emily was saying. I do think, as I mentioned earlier, every generation is the way that they are because of what they've experienced. And you look at, our short attention span, we touched on this, we're so connected to technology. I think any of these can point to something that has made our generation the way that they are. But I do agree that I think it's over-exaggerated quite a bit and probably generalized a little bit more than it should be.
Great. Any thoughts that you'd like to add to that?
Just that you have so much ahead of you. You have those descriptors, but you still have to communicate who you are as a person, who you are in respect to a generation, and then all those other factors that go into making you you. And I think when you know what the descriptors might be, it can help you articulate who are you in that framework, so that if someone is really believing that descriptor, how do you describe yourself? How do you explain yourself? How do you show up in a way that they know you? And that it isn't that it's a descriptor that they're going by to know you, but actually that you're able to articulate who you are in respect to that. That's all I would add.
Great. Well, I think we're out of time for today, but I want to personally thank each and every one of you for being a part of this panel. And for the audience out there, thank you for watching. I hope this spurred some conversation in your workplace, and if it did, feel free to reach out to us here at the Business Record and weigh in your thoughts on this conversation as well. We will flash up my email address on the screen here, and feel free to reach out to me with any additional thoughts that you have. Thank you very much for listening.